All right, welcome everyone to Care Group's webinar. Today's session is How Much Sugar is Too Much for Young Children? My name is Hannah. I'm one of the South Australian-based accredited practicing dietitians here at Care Group, and I'll be taking you through today's session. Today, we're going to cover how much sugar young children actually need. We'll look at natural sugars versus added sugars, talk about where sugar shows up in everyday foods, explore the truth around sugar and children's behaviour, look at the health impacts, both the short term and long term, and go through some simple, realistic food swaps for everyday life to help reduce our added sugar intake and focus on why balance, not perfection, really matters. So what do we mean by sugar? Sugar refers to simple carbohydrates that our bodies use as a quick source of energy. Some sugars occur naturally in nutritious foods like fructose in fruits and lactose in milk and yogurt. Other foods contain added sugars, which are included during processing or cooking to enhance sweetness. Common examples of added sugars include white and brown sugar, honey, syrups, and fruit juice concentrate. A key point to remember is that while the body processes sugars in a similar way, the package that they come in really matters. Whole foods that contain natural sugars offer nutritional benefits, whereas foods high in added sugars often provide energy, meaning calories or kilojoules, with little nutritional value. So natural sugars are found in whole foods like fruit and dairy, where they come packaged with fiber, vitamins, minerals, and water. This package is important as the fiber helps slow the digestion and therefore slows the absorption of sugar into the bloodstream. This provides more stable energy levels and also supports our gut health. Additionally, the vitamins and minerals help support a healthy immune system, promote cognitive function, and support many other essential bodily functions. Added sugars, in contrast, provide energy but very little nutritional value. They're often found in processed foods and drinks that don't offer the same benefits as whole foods. These processed foods are usually low in fiber, resulting in quick absorption of the sugar and a subsequent big rise, followed by a big crash in blood sugars and our energy levels. They're also often low in vitamins and minerals, meaning there's very little nutritional value for our bodies. And that's why fruit is not equivalent to lollies. Even though both of them contain sugar, fruit nourishes the body while lollies mainly provide quick energy without any other added benefits. The key is to focus on overall food quality rather than just the total grams of sugar. Foods that contain natural sugars as part of a balanced nutritional profile are very different from those with a high amount or even the same amount of added sugars. So how much sugar do young children actually need? So children don't require any added sugar for growth or development. Their nutritional needs can be fully met without it. What they do need are the carbohydrates or those natural sugars, which are an essential source of energy for growing bodies and active minds. And these are best provided through nutrient-rich foods such as whole grains, fruits, vegetables, and dairy. These foods not only supply carbohydrates, so meaning those natural sugars, but they also deliver fiber, vitamins, and minerals. So the World Health Organization recommends limiting free sugars, so meaning sugars added to foods, plus those in honey, syrup, and fruit juices, to less than 10% of your total energy intake, with the ideal target actually being less than 5%. So this means of all the calories or all the kilojoules that you eat across a day, ideally less than 5% of that comes from eating those free sugars. So for young children, that equates to roughly 3 to 6 teaspoons per day, depending on their age. And remember, this is an average intake target across the day, not a guideline for a single meal or a guideline for what we should try to hit every single day. So where does sugar show up? Obvious sources of those free or added sugars include things like soft drinks, cordials, lollies, chocolate, and cakes. Some of the less obvious sources include flavoured yogurt, breakfast cereals, muesli bars, and sauces, including savoury tasting sauces, can often be quite high in sugar, and baked beans. And again, that often comes from the source. The beans themselves are going to contain those natural carbohydrates, but it's the sauce on them that often has those added sugars. Drinks are a major contributor to excess sugar intake in children, including drinks that are sometimes perceived as healthy, like fruit juice or flavored milk, or sports drinks are a really big one at the moment. So these beverages can contain large amounts of sugar and they're easy to consume quickly, meaning children might take in more sugar than intended without feeling full. These drinks also contain little to no fiber, so we get that big sugar intake followed by that big energy crash. And without that fiber, we're not getting any of that satiety. So it's a lot easier to drink a big serve of fruit juice than it is to eat lots and lots and lots of fresh fruit. So while there are some positive nutrients such as calcium and protein in milk or the vitamins that are in the fruit juice, there is significantly more benefit from avoiding the excess sugar and instead having plain milk or the whole fruit, where you get the fiber, all the extra nutrients, and it's a lot harder to overeat when you're having those more natural foods. It's important for both educators and families to recognize these hidden sources of sugar. Choosing water as the main drink and offering milk and other beverages thoughtfully can significantly reduce overall sugar intake and support healthier habits. This doesn't mean that drinks like flavored milk have to be avoided 100% of the time, but it's important to look at a child's whole diet across the day and avoid multiple sources of added sugars adding up to result in excessive intake. So now looking at some of the short and long-term effects of consuming foods that contain added sugar. In the short term, added sugars can provide a quick boost of energy, which might be useful in some situations, but it's often very short-lived. You won't get that sustained energy throughout the day, but rather a short burst followed by a bit of an energy dip. Often with children, we want them to have a nice stable energy level throughout the day and for that to start to decrease at the end of the day as they get ready for bed. We don't want these big highs and lows. So after consuming sugary drinks or foods, blood glucose levels rise and then they fall. And that's a normal physiological response. However, those frequent spikes and dips can sometimes lead to not only fluctuations in energy levels, but it can also affect mood, concentration, and behavior, particularly in young children. In the long term, excess added sugar intake is associated with an increased risk of several health concerns. So these include dental decay, excess energy intake and associated weight gain, and a higher risk of chronic diseases later in life. Frequent intake of sugary foods and drinks can also displace more nutrient dense options, meaning that we choose to eat or drink these sugary options instead of those more nutrient dense options, which can result in children missing out on important nutrients needed for growth and development. Importantly, habits formed in early childhood often track into adulthood. So early exposure to high sugar foods, particularly when high sugar foods make up a bigger part of the diet, this can shape long-term preferences and long-term eating patterns. And it's a lot harder to undo some of those lifelong habits when you're in your 20s, 30s, 50s, when compared to when you're younger, and it's easier to make some changes. So the key is to focus on building sustainable, balanced eating habits. It's not about avoiding any foods altogether, but rather focus on the overall pattern and frequency of intake. Now, looking at the truth about sugar and behavior, sugar and hyperactivity has been a topic of discussion for many, many years now. It's a common belief that sugar causes hyperactivity in children. However, the research does not consistently support a direct link between sugar intake and hyperactive behavior. What often plays a bigger role is the context in which sugary foods are consumed, such as parties, celebrations, or just exciting environments where children are already more stimulated and energetic. So, parental and caregiver expectations can also influence how behavior is perceived. If we expect children to become hyper after sugar, we may be more likely to interpret normal behavior as such. So a lot of the time, it's more just that kids are at, say, a birthday party and they're around lots of other children. There's a lot of noise. They're very overly excited. And that's what's giving them that sort of hyperactive behavior. But it's not that it's the piece of cake or the cordial that they've had. It's more to do with the environment that they're in and that the kids kind of bounce off each other and they all end up with a lot of energy. So the key thing to remember is that normal fluctuations in children's energy, mood, and behavior are expected, and they're not reliable evidence of any sort of sugar rush. So the goal is balance over restriction. Treat foods can absolutely be part of normal eating patterns. Rather than labeling foods as good or bad, it's more helpful to view all foods as having a place with different roles and frequencies. Strict restriction or moralizing foods can sometimes increase desire for them, and it can create unnecessary guilt around eating. Foods like birthday cake, for example, are expected and appropriate in social and celebratory settings. These moments are part of normal childhood experiences, and we don't want them to be avoided. It's also a really great opportunity to teach children about balance so they can enjoy these treat foods, they just don't make up the majority of their diet. And the overall aim is to reduce everyday reliance on foods that are high in added sugar while still allowing for flexibility and enjoyment. So it's going to help these children to develop healthy, balanced relationships with food over time. And just like how the behaviours around excessive intake of these added sugared foods and beverages can track into adulthood, so can the attitudes that they pick up around food. So feeling guilty around food or feeling like it's bad to eat certain foods or that certain foods just are bad often tracks into adulthood. You'll find a lot of adults who are constantly trying out different diets have had childhoods where foods have been bad or foods have been restricted in some way. So it's a really great opportunity to teach children about that balance and how all foods are great. Some foods just provide us with a lot more nutrition, so we need to eat a lot more of those. And some foods just taste great and they're fun, so we save those for different social settings rather than having them all the time. So now let's look at some practical food swaps to reduce added sugar intake. So a great swap for kids is swapping high sugar cereals for some oats or whole grain cereals and using fresh fruit to add in the flavour rather than relying on the added sugars to add in that sweet flavour. Swapping flavoured yogurt for plain yogurt and again adding some fruit for the flavour, a bit of colour, some fibre and some vitamins as well. Works really well. If you have children who really like that mixed flavour, then I recommend you can mash the fruit in rather than just having it sprinkled on top. I find sometimes if we mash the fruit and mix it into the yogurt, it feels a little bit more like the flavoured yogurts, and sometimes kids are a bit more receptive to that. Swapping muesli bars out for whole grain crackers and cheese is another really good one. So we can get some good quality natural carbohydrates from the whole grain crackers and some fibre in there. We get some protein from the cheese as well. A nice swap there. And swapping juice for water, of course, is always a good one. We want water to be the main fluid that we're giving to children, and then other things can go along the side of that on occasion. Some tips, particularly for when you're at home. When baking, you can generally reduce sugar in recipes by about a quarter to a third of a cup without it impacting the taste or the texture too significantly. So try just taking the normal recipes that you would use and just slowly reducing it. You shouldn't see too much of a dramatic change in the outcome. Offering fruit as the dessert most days is also a really good one. Using nut butters, yogurt, or again, fruit instead of some sweet spreads, particularly things like Nutella, those spreads that have a lot of added sugar in them. And reading ingredient lists. So if sugar's listed in the first few ingredients in the list, then there's going to be a much higher amount of sugar in that product. So we want to try to avoid any packaged foods where sugar is in those first sort of 3 to 4 ingredients. And remember, gradual changes are more sustainable. So you don't need to change everything overnight. You can slowly start to implement just one change, or you might start by just slowly reducing the amount of sugar you use in cooking. You might even start by combining cereals. Sometimes we see that children are a bit more receptive if you keep their normal cereal and add in a little bit of a new cereal and then slowly reduce the quantity of the sugary cereal and increase the more healthy option. That helps children just adapt a little bit easier as well, rather than all of a sudden one day, everything's different. So reading food labels is also a really important job for the adults in kids' life to help with their managing their added sugar intake. So you want to look at the nutrition information panel. Nutrition information panels are always going to have a per serve and a per 100 grams column. The per serve is going to vary depending on product. So the manufacturers can decide their own serve size. So we don't typically use that, especially when we're comparing products, because you'll be comparing two different serve sizes most of the time. So we use the per 100 grams column. If the sugar content per 100 grams is more than 15 grams, that means that it's generally quite high in sugar. So we want to check the ingredient list to look for signs that there might be some added sugar in there. So other names that you might see for added sugar rather than just sugar will be things like dextrose, fructose, glucose, golden syrup, honey, maple syrup, sucrose, malt and maltose, lactose, brown sugar, caster sugar, maple syrup, raw sugar. These are all different forms of just added sugars. So you want to check the ingredient list then if there's more than 15 grams of 100 grams to see if it's coming from these added sugars. In some foods, it's going to come from natural sugars. Not that our fruit comes packaged, but if it did, you would find that there's a higher amount of sugar in those foods, but they're coming from the natural sources. So we want to keep an eye out for these added sugars more than anything. See if they're making up the ingredients list, and if so, if it's more than 15 grams per 100 grams and you're seeing some of these names on the ingredient list, that's a pretty clear sign that there's quite a bit of added sugar in this product. Where the nutrition information panels can also be helpful is if you are comparing two products. So again, you would use the per 100 grams column to compare those two different products. So for example, two different yogurts. If you were looking for the one that has the least amount of sugar, then you can look in the per 100 grams column on each product, look at their total sugars. Some products will separate out into different kinds of sugar. For example, you might see on some yogurt products that it will say total sugar, and it might even separate out lactose being the naturally occurring sugar that comes in dairy products. So then that will give you an idea, other than lactose, how much sugar is in there. And it will help you compare those two products. And generally, we want to choose the lowest sugar option when we're comparing two products. So sometimes it's not about choosing the absolute best possible product that is available to you. But if you have two yogurt brands that you know that your kids love, then you might just compare those two for their sugar content per 100 grams and go for the one with the lower amount of sugar. So we want to make sure that we are creating a healthy food environment for children. So a few things that we want to keep in mind for that include role modeling by adults. Children, as I'm sure we know, pick up on everything around them. They absorb absolutely everything. And that includes things like our attitudes and beliefs around foods. So we want to make sure that we are leading by example, that we are eating healthy, nutritious foods in front of children, that we are practicing good balance when it comes to food, and that we are also using some neutral language around food. So we don't want to talk about foods being bad. We certainly don't want to talk about ourselves being bad for eating certain foods, which is quite a common thing to say, oh, I was quite bad on the weekend. I had cake at this party or biscuits at this thing. So we want to make sure that we are avoiding that kind of language. Children really pick up on that. So we want to stay very neutral in our language, and just remember that all foods have a place in our diet. There are no bad foods. There are no foods that can make us bad. It's just that there are some foods that have more nutrients. We want to eat more of those. And so we want to lead by example and show children that we are also eating those foods. Structured meal and snacks are also really helpful, making sure that children have a routine around their food. They know when to expect food. We want to avoid using sweets as rewards. This can help really reinforce that idea that certain foods are good or bad, or that we need to be good or bad to earn certain foods. So if we don't use food as a reward, then instead foods just become this thing you get to eat. That's not something that can be taken away from you. And some events like birthdays might have birthday cake. You don't have to be good to earn those foods. That's just a part of life, and it's just a part of socializing. And we want to encourage children to listen to their hunger and fullness cues. So we don't want to be pushing children to eat when they are physically too full. We want to encourage them to express when they're feeling hungry. If we ignore those hunger and fullness cues in our childhood, that can really track into adulthood as well. And I know I talk to a lot of adults who have quite a hard time actually identifying when they're feeling hungry and when they're feeling full, especially in adult life when things get busier and we're working and we're not always able to eat in structured ways like we try to provide for children. But if we allow children to really listen to their body's hunger and fullness cues, that can help them throughout the rest of their life be able to tap into those feelings and have a much healthier relationship with food and with their bodies. So a few key take-home messages for today. So children do not need any added sugar, but small amounts are okay. Natural sugars in whole foods are not at all the enemy, so we don't need to be cutting out fruit from a child's diet because it has the natural sugars in it. We definitely want to be including plenty of those foods. Frequency and overall pattern matter more than any one particular food that you might have as a one-off or on occasion. Sugar does not reliably cause hyperactivity in children, and balance, not perfection, supports lifelong healthy habits. So if you liked this webinar and you want to know more, we can organise on-site or virtual educations for your childcare. Educators and families are also welcome to join. So reach out to us to arrange a date if you would like, and we can send you a quote. We also do so much more than this. So together within childcare centres, we help you to build healthy relationships with food for children. We provide nutrition training, which includes fussy eating training, menu reviews and development, and food allergy training as well. So thank you so much, everybody, for attending, and have a wonderful day.